Hey guys, this is the last of the setups versus mixed weapons series of drills. We're going to be doing 11 through 15-ish. So we ended with a middle to slot shot. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start with a cut and we're going to pull it into a thrust. If you have watched the Meyer video on pulling, you've seen something like this. So essentially what I want to do, whether I'm starting from a middle guard or a retracted guard, is I'm going to threaten with the cut, and I want to make sure that I'm getting that point out. I want them to believe that this is a real cut. I also want to make sure that the sword is preceding my body. I don't want to step and then pull a cut because I'm going to get cracked in the head. So I'm going to project my sword into a cut, and I'm going to let it bounce back into the body. That kind of bounce motion is very important. If I just do this, they might buy it, they might not, but we want their brains to feel like it is a real thing. We want to trigger that defensive response. So we're going to throw and kind of snap it back, and I'm bringing it back into my body so that it can turn into a thrust. So, boom. Just make sure you're getting that bounce. And as a safety precaution, I like to, after I've landed the thrust, let my hands transition high on the way back out. That gives me the coverage to get back out. If I do this, whether it's a low thrust or not, and then I just try to leave, or I stay put to admire my handiwork, and they're not dead, or if you're doing HEMA and you're in a tournament, the referee hasn't called hold, you're gonna get cracked on the head. So make sure that and then we leave. So easy enough. Throwing over how or middle how, doesn't really matter. And you can get it pretty close. You want them to be chasing out to your sword to cover. So the more you can get them to push out to meet your sword, the better. So the closer we get it, I pull it in, drive the thrust with the body, stay covered as I leave. Okay, so that's setup number one. Setup number two is building off of that, and that does work if you have somebody with a shield that's pushing out, works out fine. And of course, if they have a longsword. So the next setup, setup 12, is based off of that. So if they've seen that, or they parry that, it didn't work for them, we're going to turn that back into the slot shot. So I've done my pull and thrust, they've parried it, or I see that they're going to parry it, so I'm going to, from the 6-9 position, let my palm turn down, and I'm gonna do the slot shot. So now we're building off of it. And again, we're sliding down the pedal on purpose because we're trying to see how tightly we can get to it. And then back to leaving with a hanging guard. So again, I'm starting my cut, pulling in for the thrust. Thrust is being parried. Roll palm down, slide along, because ideally they're pushing over this way to defend the parry, so we're going to hit them behind their sword, and then we leave. So that's the next setup. All right, so we've got 1, 2. Setup number 3 is actually going to be based on this thrust to hip shot that we like so much. It's a good shot, and people's right hips, particularly if they are a longsword, tend to be vulnerable, but if they have seen this setup before or they're reacting well to it, the most likely reaction is going to be either a downward cut or a punch block. So all of their energy and balance is going to be going this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to thrust. I'm going to start this cut. I'm going to come over here and hit. I want to get off, because if they have put all of their energy into this, the most likely response, the most likely counter is going to be something like that right cross or right uppercut. So we want to make sure thrust, we're aiming low. We need their energy going this way. Then we turn it back over here. And I want my body going this way because I don't want to just flick my sword out. I want my body to sell it. Boom. And then I want my body on this side of the sword to keep me safe. And I can leave with the high guard. So the last one for today is actually an overthrust from retracted guard. Generally, when people see a point forward, they assume a thrust is going to happen first, or they're going to see a big chambering motion. People see a retracted guard, they're generally assuming cuts. What I like to do from This retracted guard though, particularly the very lazy, look, this is on my shoulder, no threat, is I actually like to roll out with a thrust. So when I'm doing this, I'm pivoting because we want to get good structure. So I'm going to get my sword out pretty far. I'm going to pivot and step. And as you can see, I'm looking for that high cover. And then I like to roll over because if they're over here, if they're in a Vamtag or a plow, or even if they're a sword and shield person and they're over here, the most likely defensive motion is going to be to push your sword to their left. So I'm going to put this out, and if they push my sword, I'm just going to follow that around. And now my head is on this side. I've essentially thrown a kind of a high middle or a thwart cut over here. But we can do this from pretty long range. So I'm definitely not in range. With a step and a cut, I can. It's maybe a little far out for a cut. But with a nice thrusting motion, you can see I'm getting quite a bit of push on my pel. So if I'm doing this in HEMA, I'm definitely going to stab somebody hard enough. And in SCA heavy, it's going to work out just fine. So from this relaxed guard, boom, cut, and this gives you an easy way to leave. So we kind of have a series of setups that build on each other. Most of the ones that we're seeing today have come from previous setups. So we have seen the pull thrust, and then if they parry that, we turn that into the next cut. We have seen before where we do the thrust to the hip and then leave over here. This is kind of shortening that circle based on somebody that's defending well or they've seen this pattern before. So we thrust low and come right into the slot shot. And then from a relaxed, fairly far out, we lead with the thrust from a retracted sword position rather than something that generally signals the thrust. This also keeps us nice and safe if I have my high hands. This defends me on the way in as well. And if they parry that, end up on the thwart, and we are on this side. So one thing I want you to be aware of, and think about yourself if you're coming up with your own things that work for you, because everybody's body moves a little bit differently. Your opponent is who tells you how to kill them. So any of these setups that we've covered in previous weeks or today, if the opponent isn't reacting in the appropriate manner, it's not going to work. Something I tell my students a lot is that combinations or setups or however you envision them are not magic spells. You can't just throw setup 7 at somebody and hope that it works. That's not how this works. These work because the opponent is reacting in a particular way. So if I have thrown this setup, which I've shown in previous weeks, and my opponent is defending it, every time I try that thrust to hip shot, they're defending it. Well, then I know I need to change that up. I show them something they've seen before, and then I turn it into a new thing. If somebody has seen the pull thrust, and they're not letting me hit them with it anymore, I show it to them, but then I turn it into a new thing. You can hit them with the first one, great. So if you're developing your own setup, just make sure that you are taking the information your opponent is giving to you and using that to build the setups you need to defeat that person. One thing you can do is picture, and I do this a lot, picture the things that did not work when you were fighting the last person you got to spar with. You know, you tried a little 1-2 setup, it didn't work. How did the opponent beat it? Did they push it to the side? Did they range out? Did they step in and crowd it? Use that motion that they're doing to build your next setup off of. Your opponent's going to tell you how to kill them. So definitely use the patterns I've been showing you, try to be mindful of why they work, and then start building your own on the pel or solo drilling, and we'll see how it goes. Thanks a lot.